Welcome back. This is Module 2, Criterion 1, Expected Learning Outcomes. The design of an academic program begins actually at the endpoint. That is, to understand or know what are the outcomes that have to be achieved by the students when they graduate from the program. This is called backward delivery in the design of a learning program, but we will come to that later. At the highest, most all-encompassing level, the essence of all that is learned in a 4-year degree program can be condensed into a set of about 10 to 15 learning outcomes, or often called expected learning outcomes. ELOs form the foundation of all that is taught, or stated differently, everything that is taught and experienced in a degree program can be tied directly to succinct ELO statements. The way the slides are organized in this extended introduction is that each criterion and its requirements are shown at the start. In the case of Criterion 1, there are 5 requirements. Requirement 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, 1.4, and 1.5. We leave out the rating scale 1 through 7 for now. We will come back to the rating scale after discussing all 8 criteria. Each requirement would be explained in turn. We begin with requirement 1.1. It reads, the program to show that the expected learning outcomes are appropriately formulated in accordance with an established learning taxonomy, are aligned to the vision and mission of the university, and are known to all stakeholders. What is a learning outcome? A learning outcome is basically a clear and specific statement that identifies what students must be able to accomplish at the level of competency required to pass the program. Learning outcomes consist basically of 3 components: an action verb, the content or topic phrase, and a condition or a what phrase. The first component is action, to do something. For example, to explain the way the stock exchange of a particular country works. The explanation is the action. And then there is the content or the topic. The content is the stock exchange of a particular country. And finally, there is a condition. In this case, the condition is how the stock exchange works. As another example, the second example in the PowerPoint slide, to produce. Produce is the action. Produce what? Produce a self-assessment report. The self-assessment report is the content. And the condition? The condition is to produce the self-assessment report in order to do an AUN-QA program level assessment. For the third example, to prepare. Prepare is the action. Prepare what? Prepare a set of PowerPoint slides. The set of PowerPoint slides is the content or what needs to be prepared. And the condition is to explain Newton's first law of motion. Every learning outcome must contain an action, a content or topic, and the condition. Learning outcomes can be classified according to several levels or categories. One categorization widely used is shown here as generic learning outcomes, as specific learning outcomes, and as lifelong learning outcomes. Generic knowledge, skills, and abilities are learning outcomes that all students must possess by the time they graduate. For example, all students are required to master digital competency. It is also often the case that students are required to master 2 languages. At any given university, all students also need to possess knowledge of civic-mindedness, how to be an upright citizen, to be caring and compassionate, and also to serve one's country. At the next level are the knowledge, skills, and abilities unique to a particular study program. For example, the knowledge and skills unique to a mechanical engineer or unique to a psychologist. It is broadly the case that generic abilities are learned in the earlier years of university life, while specific abilities are learned in the later years of university life. The third category of learning outcomes is lifelong learning skills such as how to be an independent learner or to be able to carry on learning for oneself even after graduation. There are also the skills of critical thinking, lateral thinking, or being able to what is commonly called think out of the box. A popular hierarchy for categorizing learning outcomes is that of Benjamin Bloom's learning outcome taxonomy. As you would know, the levels from the lowest to the highest are to remember something, to understand what it is, to be able to apply the information, and then even higher is to be able to analyze the information, to draw connections or differentiate, to compare, to examine, and so on. Higher than analysis would be evaluation, the stage of understanding a system, knowing its weaknesses, and importantly, how it can be improved. Then the highest level of Bloom's taxonomy is the ability to create new information, new knowledge, as when a thesis or dissertation is written, or to produce a prototype of a new product. We have all studied Bloom's learning outcome taxonomy. Expect that you will spend some time rewriting and improving the expected learning outcomes of your program using one or more learning outcome taxonomy. As mentioned earlier, learning outcomes can be placed on a stage of study continuum. Generic or foundational knowledge is gained mostly in the first and second years. Advanced or specialized knowledge is gained mainly in the third and fourth years. In terms of the action verbs to describe learning outcomes, they can be categorized broadly according to the various levels of Bloom's taxonomy. For example, to find or to list something would be at the remember or recall level, whereas words such as design or construct would refer to something more at the evaluate and create level. Note that the action verbs are not exclusive to each level of the Bloom taxonomy. There can be overlap. It depends partly on how the learning outcome sentence is constructed. There are many Bloom taxonomy action verb tables. This is one. This is another in the form of a light bulb. And yet another, this one in the form of a wheel. Feel free to use whichever action verb chart that suits your needs. Benjamin Bloom defines also 3 domains of learning. There is the character domain. This refers to the value system taught at a university to instill in students good character, proper attitude, and wholesome values. What kinds of values does a system wishes to instill in its student? What are the attitude and affect towards society, towards giving back to our fellow beings? There is also the employment domain. This domain of learning objectives would be the knowledge gained from the study program in order to do a specific job. This is subject-specific, not transferable from one field to another field of study. The employability domain refers to transferable skills, soft skills, communication skills, psychomotor skills, skills that every graduate needs to possess, such skills as tested in the Scholastic Aptitude Test or the ACT test. This is not a workshop on Bloom's taxonomy, which in itself can take several days to go through. But we introduce it in some detail because it is common and widely used. Extending from the previous slide, we can see that Bloom's learning objectives also specify hierarchies in each of the 3 domains of cognition, psychomotor, and affect. We have already mentioned the hierarchy in the cognitive domain. Remember, understand, apply, analyze, evaluate, and create. The level in the psychomotor domain are perception, set, to produce a guided response, mechanism, complex or overt response, adaptation, and origination. You may wish to study into this topic deeper on your own. In order to provide a balanced view, we mentioned several other learning taxonomies. There is Fink's Taxonomy of Significant Learning, developed in 2003. How do we learn? And how can the process of learning be improved? Learning begins with understanding foundational knowledge. The next step would be to apply the knowledge learned. Beyond that would be the ability to integrate or to make connections among different pieces of knowledge. Fink's application and integration components are similar to Bloom's apply, analyze, and then evaluate stages. Beyond that, Fink's human dimension, or learning about self and others, and caring, or developing new interests and values. These are likened to Bloom's create stage. There is also the 6 facets of understanding, developed by Wiggins and McTighe in 2005. Consider the terms used. The perspective facet means to understand a subject matter, an event, or an issue from multiple points of view. Having empathy means to be able to walk in another person's shoes. Self-knowledge or self-awareness is really understanding how we learn and knowing whether or not we are progressing in our learning. The application facet, or relating what we have learned to new and novel situations, is certainly a big part of the learning process. So is interpretation, or the construction of new thought from what we see and learn. The facet of explanation means to be able to accurately describe a theory or an event. This skill is basic to all learning taxonomy. There is also the solo, or the structure of observed learning outcomes taxonomy. Solo begins with the lowest level called pre-structural, or only remembering and understanding separate pieces of information. The next level is unistructural, where several pieces of information form a single concept. The concept here could be the various parts of a bicycle, the bicycle chain, the gears, and the pedal that enable the bicycle to be propelled forward. At the multi-structural level is the ability to grasp multiple concepts. For the bicycle example, this could be how to propel the bicycle, how to steer the bicycle, and how to stop the bicycle. The next level is relational, would be how the various parts of the bicycle interact to enable riding. The highest abstract level may be considering other means of transporting people or goods using other than a bicycle. So, in brief, we saw Bloom's, Fink's, and the solo taxonomies, plus the 6 facets of understanding model. For the purpose of an AUN-QA assessment, the use of any learning outcome model is acceptable. What is important is the concept of alignment. At the lowest or simplest level is the learning outcome provided from a single lecture. There must be coherence and alignment among all the material provided from the start to the end of the lecture. Then, over the duration of the semester, there may be 10 or 20 lectures, all of which need to be aligned or be related to one another. These lectures form a course. Several courses in a program of study are related to each other, such as the various courses to be taught in the general science degree program. All the courses need to be aligned to each other. The outcomes of the program need to be aligned with the outcomes of the university, and these need to be aligned with the learning outcomes required by employers. At the highest level would be the outcomes that society require of university graduates. This is the concept of alignment, vertical alignment based on a forward delivery system. We can also deliver the learning outcomes via backward design, as mentioned earlier. That is, to first understand the needs of society and what employers require of the graduates. From there, the universities formulate the learning outcomes, and it provides for each program of study a set of generic knowledge and skills required of the students. From there, the department designs the courses for each program, courses in the first, second, third, and fourth years. The ball is then passed to individuals or groups of lecturers to design the content of each course and each lesson in each course. So, to recap, it is very important that there be vertical alignment in designing and delivering the learning outcomes. The second point is, which should be used, forward delivery design or backward delivery design? You guessed it. The majority of educational systems use backward delivery design. We start with the endpoint in mind, and that is what society and employers want to see in university graduates. And that is really the meaning of an educational system that is outcome-based. Backward delivery design is used to develop the teaching material. The curriculum is developed from a very clear understanding of the expected or intended learning outcomes that students need to master by the time they graduate. Again, expected learning outcomes are the foundation for all program design issues that follows. This slide further reinforces the concept of an outcome-based system of teaching design. To first understand the desired outcomes and to use a backward method of delivery. It is commonly termed OBE, or outcome-based education. This is contrasted with the traditional approach to teaching design, which is focused more on the input side of things. Input could refer to the number of lecture hours, but does the number of lecture hours really correlate well with how much students learn? Probably not. To be output focused would mean to be able to quantify what students have gained from each lecture. Admittedly, output-based measures are more difficult to quantify. Or learning to pass an examination, 90% passing, 100% passing rate, versus learning to apply concepts to real-world situations. The latter is more difficult to measure. So, here are the key concepts in providing an outcomes-based education. First, there is a focus on the end in mind. What students need to know by the time they graduate or when they start working. Second is the importance of vertical alignment from lessons outcome to courses outcome, to program outcomes, to university outcomes, and a good understanding of the needs of employers and society. Third, lessons and courses are designed based mainly on backward delivery method. Fourth, in a large sense, the objective of a program is really to create multiple opportunities for students to learn. OBE means also to design multiple ways for students to achieve an outcome. To learn through studying a textbook, to also have hands-on project to practice what has been learned, and to be able to see how the things that are learned can be applied in the real world. Remember a previous slide where you were asked to write down on post-it notepads what are your expectations and takeaways from this workshop? Consider the following to be model expectations of this workshop. The first learning outcome to achieve would be that you are able to define or describe what the AUN-QA framework or model is. The second learning outcome would be that you are able to interpret what each of the 8 assessment criteria are. The third learning outcome is that you are able to apply the PDCA approach in doing an AUN-QA assessment. You would also need to be able to explain the requirements of writing a self-assessment report. And finally, you should be able to describe the entire AUN-QA assessment process. Here are the steps on how to write learning outcomes. Remember, each LO must have an action verb, the content or topic must be stated, and then write down the condition for the learning outcome to take place. You may use 2 action verbs per learning outcome if you need to, but use at most 2. Don't use vague terms. Use the terms in the Bloom taxonomy tables shown earlier. And don't write complicated learning outcomes. Be succinct, straightforward, and complete. You must be able to see that the learning outcomes are related to one another and that there is some hierarchy to it. Also, apply the important concept of alignment as discussed. You should try to include all levels or all facets of the taxonomy that you use. In other words, there should be some degree of remembering required, some amount of applying knowledge, some amount of analysis, evaluation, and so on. All this means for your learning outcomes to be SMART. S-M-A-R-T. The first is specific. State concisely what your learning outcomes are. Next, each learning outcome must be measurable. It is no point to have a learning outcome where the output cannot be measured. The learning outcomes need to also be achievable. Is it too difficult to achieve for what is considered a bachelor degree or a master degree? Conversely, is any outcome too easy to achieve? Is the goal set too low? Next, all the learning outcomes need also be relevant to the study program. And finally, can the learning outcomes be achieved within the time limit prescribed, within the semester, year, or period of study as defined? Use the SMART principle when you write your learning outcomes. We take a closer look at the concept of relevance in the SMART principle. On this left side of the slide is content, or what is taught in the course. On the right side is what is measured or what is tested in the course. Sometimes, not everything that is taught and is important gets measured. We call this a deficiency. That is, important content that is learned, but the learning of which is not measured. A flip side of this is that students are sometimes tested on things that are not taught. We sometimes hear students say, this is not supposed to be part of the examination. So it is measured, but it is not taught. We call this contamination. What is important in this slide is the concept of construct. Construct is that which is taught and is also measured. The greater the overlap between content and measure, the greater the construct in the academic course. This is also called the concept of construct validity. Thus, the SMART principle is related to the concept of construct validity. So, for Criterion 1, Requirement 1.1, the program is to show that its expected learning outcomes are appropriately formulated according to a learning taxonomy. The left side shows Bloom's taxonomy, but again, any learning taxonomy is acceptable to use. What is important is to ensure the alignment of the learning outcomes. Next, the requirements and vision and mission of the program, small v and m, must be aligned to the requirements and vision and mission of the university, big V and M. Remember again, the outcomes required by the program, by the faculty, and by the university, these must all be aligned. Next, information about the learning outcomes need to be conveyed to all stakeholders: students, teachers, fresh graduates, alumni, and employers. These are the requirements for 1.1. Next is requirement 1.2. There are one or more learning outcomes from every lesson. From the 10 or 20 lessons that make up a course, all the lessons' learning outcome must be aligned. Aligned to form the learning outcomes for individual courses. Then, the learning outcomes from the 40 or so courses that make up a degree program, these need to be aligned also to form the higher order learning outcomes for the entire program. Be sure to make clear this vertical alignment when you write your self-assessment report. Requirement 1.3. Show the classification of courses in the program. Courses that teach generic knowledge, skills, and ability. Higher level courses that provide program-specific subject matter expertise. And course material that help develop lifelong learning skills such as learning for self-improvement and critical thinking. For requirement 1.4, the program needs to show that feedback from its stakeholders have been gathered and are reflected in its expected learning outcomes. What would be the evidence for this requirement? It could be minutes of meeting with faculty members to discuss curriculum review matters. It could be the same for students. Departments sometimes have end-of-semester meetings with students to discuss a range of issues, including course feedback, curriculum, examination matters, student life, and so on. Importantly, is the input to ELO design from external stakeholders. What are their inputs given the fast-changing work environment? What is the evidence of meeting with a range of organizations that have hired graduates from the program? Or is there a department consultative committee that works closely to the program, listen to their needs, factor in their inputs to ELO design? Some of you may remember a Tier 1 training where we used managing a zoo for an in-class exercise. The example is a 4-year degree program on how to manage a zoo. What are the expected learning outcomes of the program? Take some time to read the details in this slide. Note the need for conciseness in writing the ELOs, the use of action verbs, that there is some hierarchy to the various learning outcomes. The totality of the ELOs need to be comprehensive for the program of study, and so on. For the last requirement, show how the learning outcomes have been achieved by the students. Each course begins with students told what they can expect to learn from taking it. And at the end of the course, students provide feedback on a range of issues, including whether the lecturer has done a good job in conducting the course. The assumption is that if the lecturer has done a good job, then the students would mostly be able to achieve the learning outcomes. Other channels of ELO feedback might include exit surveys taken at the point of graduation. And for ELO feedback to be truly outcome-based, they are also taken 1 to 2 years after students are able to practice what they have learned, or 1 to 2 years after graduation or after they have become employed. Note that requirement 1.5 is probably the most difficult for criterion 1.0. It requires evidence of accurate, complete, every semester feedback from every course in the program. There is an entire range of ELOs, from those that are individual lessons or lectures, to those that are courses, to those from an entire program, from the faculty, and from the university. In the Philippines, learning outcomes are sometimes called graduate learning attributes. Lesson learning outcomes are relatively easier to write than program learning outcomes. The time frame is short. What is to be taught within 1 to 2 hours. There is less to measure. Measure only what has been taught in that 1 to 2 hours. And of course, it is much easier to plan and complete one lesson than it is an entire course. Basically, learning outcomes range from those that are specific to those that are broad as we move from lesson to course to program requirements. For the last part of this module, we will have an exercise on writing learning outcomes. A fictitious program outline has been created. This is the Bachelor of Sports Science at the AUN University. This is an undergraduate degree. The program aims to breed sports scientists and practitioners, to breed leaders, decision makers, and excellent communicators in sports science. You have the handout, exercise on writing learning outcomes. 4 program learning outcomes are stated. 1. Master the principles of sports science. 2. To plan exercise prescription for health and fitness. 3. To exhibit sports professionalism. And 4. To engage in creative problem solving at work. This exercise involves revising and improving the learning outcomes. Rewrite them onto a single PowerPoint slide. This exercise should take you and your group between 30 to 40 minutes to complete. This is the first exercise of this extended training. Alternatively, if you wish, you or your group can work on improving the learning outcomes of your own program. Whichever choice you decide on, note that you will use the same exercise to continue as we go into producing the courses specification and the curriculum map. This is the end of Module 2. For the next module, Module 3, we will discuss program, structure, and content.